gentlemen. I'm John Doe, one of the kind of organizers for this event. Our speaker today is James C. Claypool, who is a professor emeritus of history at Northern Kentucky University. He is well known throughout the state as an engaging speaker and author on Kentucky history. He is the author of Our Fellow Kentuckians, Rascals, Heroes, and Just Plain Uncommon Folks. Also Kentucky Bluegrass Music, and the tradition continues, the story of old Latonia and Turfway racecourses. He is also the co-editor of the Northern Kentucky Encyclopedia with Paul Tencotti. Jim Claypool.
Thank you. Well, there are no free lunches, and this is audience participation time. Each of you received a piece of paper, some of you have 2 of these, and your task, should you decide to accept it, and it will instruct after we accept that, of course, like in Mission Impossible, is to simply read that line or 2 that you have there, and then I'll play off of it. And this is not original with me. I used to teach Kentucky history, and one of my students brought some papers in one day and did this, and it was so effective I've stolen it. You can't remember. So they're all numbered, they're all Kentuckians, and let's get started. Who has number 1?
Thanks, Mr. Gist. I could have drowned.
Thanks, Mr. Gist. I could have drowned. Who is that? That's Christopher Gist. We have a historical society here in Northern Kentucky, the Christopher Gist Historical Society, and actually one of his relatives lives right here in Northern Kentucky. Who was Christopher Gist? Christopher Gist was a very early pioneer explorer of the West. You got to remember, Kentucky was the West. We were the first state across the Appalachians, and we were the West. He came out of Pennsylvania, came into Kentucky along the Ohio River line, got down to Louisville. That's not Louisville, that's Louisville. Met a band of friendly rather than hostile Indians, and they said, you better get out of here because there's troubles. So he went back. Then in the process, he spread the word about what it was like here and what was going on in the future state and Commonwealth of Kentucky. Times came by, and there was something called the pre-years prior to the so-called French and Indian War, a war that essentially ran for 7 years, from 1756 or so until 1763. At this time, and I can say this because I'm English, God put Englishmen on this planet to make money. And they had those land grants that they were selling off to German and Irish immigrants later, as you well know. Well, the English were ready to move west. There's a small problem with that. The French thought the West belonged to them. If you don't believe that, you go up and down the Ohio River and you'll find these plates from time to time that said, claim for Louis, whichever Louis it happened to be, in the name of the King of France. The lieutenant governor of the Virginia Commonwealth, a Lord Dunwoody, sent a 21-year-old captain of militia out west to deliver an ultimatum to the French commander. And the ultimatum essentially said, get out of English territory. But this young commander didn't know the territory, so they hired Christopher Gist to lead the party. It was the dead of winter. They looked all over the territory and finally found somebody who they thought might be the commander of the French forces in the West. Gave him this letter, to which you can imagine the French commander must have said, and headed back. As they were heading back, they had to cross several swollen creeks and rivers. And in the process, this 21-year-old captain fell into the creek and nearly drowned. But Christopher Gist jumped in and saved him. And of course, that captain's name was George Washington. Wow. George Washington. Now, Washington was nobody's fool. He was an educated man. And he had just participated in a great adventure. And so when he got back to colonial Williamsburg, and he had certainly studied his Latin and Roman history, he decided to write a book. And most of us who have taken Latin know that the thing you study when you study Latin is Caesar's commentaries on the Gallic Wars, right? Yeah. Also, Sum Gallia Expedici and Tre Partes. Yeah, all Gaul's divided into 3 parts. Actually, it wasn't divided into 2 parts, but who cares? And, you know, Latin Many of us take Latin. Latin is a dead language, dead as it can be. It killed all the Romans, and now it's killing me. Remember that? Well, Washington had taken his Latin and saw the commentaries, and so he published a book about his adventures. The Journal of, now Major, because he's promoted, George Washington, sent by the Honorable Robert Dinwiddie, this man is he's Lieutenant Governor, Commander-in-Chief of Virginia, to the Commandant of the French forces on the Ohio. This was the bestseller of the 1750s in colonial America. This is the book that made George Washington's name. This is the precursor that set up his political career. When the war broke out, he was given a command in Pennsylvania, and he was put in charge of a fort known as Fort Necessary. I guess it was necessary to keep the French out of Pennsylvania. The first thing he did, surrender. He was surrounded by the French and surrendered. Not exactly a glorious beginning. But without Christopher Gist, this man who has so many connections to northern Kentucky, who knows what the history of America would be after that. Number 2.
Rebecca, remember me? I'm your husband, Daniel. And by the way, whose baby is that?
Rebecca, remember me? I'm your husband, Daniel. And by the way, whose baby is that? So said Daniel Boone after 11 months in the wilderness. Do the math. And he had returned home from his many adventures here in Kentucky to discover he now had a young son. And he sat down at the table with Rebecca and his family to discuss the matter, and he found out who the father was. It was his brother. But he concluded that since they had kept it in the family, that would be perfectly all right. They worked it out. We all know Boone's impact here in Kentucky, Boone County, and his settlement here, and what went. And of course, eventually he ended up in Missouri. And years later, John Filson, the first official historian of Kentucky, wrote a book, The History of Kentucky, which is half the story of Daniel Boone. It's basically half the biography of Daniel Boone. He actually interviewed Daniel Boone, who was sitting in a rocking chair in Missouri in his later years, and Filson reputedly asked Boone, "Well, Daniel, you've been out there in the wilderness in the dark deeps of Kentucky. Was there any time you were ever lost?" Daniel reared back and said, "Well, I can't rightly say I was ever lost, but I was confused one time for 3 days." Boone died in Kentucky, and here in Kentucky, as many of us know, we dig them up. We dig them up and we bring them back to where they belong. And so later we dug up Daniel Boone and brought him back to Kentucky. We dug up Man of War from his burial place in Plymouth Horse Park. We dug up the great jockey Isaac Murphy and moved him to the horse park. And we're always digging them up. Not too long ago we dug up Zachary Taylor to see if he'd been poisoned. We dig them up. Number 3.
Glad to make your acquaintance, Mr. Boone. I go by the name of Simon Butler.
Glad to make your acquaintance, Mr. Boone. I go by the name of Simon Butler. Who am I? Simon Kenton. And of course, why would he be calling himself Simon Butler? Well, because he was on the run. He had been in North Carolina and in love. Young boys fall in love. And gotten into an altercation with a young man who he thought he killed. And he fled first to Pennsylvania, where he got in with a bunch of explorers, and ultimately decided he would hit the road. Hit the road and came to Kentucky, settling, of course, in Mason County, Washington, the old settlement there in Washington, reputedly planting the first corn crop in Kentucky, and then the Indians arrived. When the Indians arrived, he went to Boonesboro, where he struck up a friendship with Daniel Boone, involved in the various things that Boone was involved in. Ultimately, he was captured. He was taken up to Chillicothe by the Indians and made to run the gauntlet. A very famous painting of Simon Kenton running the gauntlet. He came back to Kentucky, had no claims really that were any substantial. In fact, I think that claim that he had in Washington was lost because of the dispute over the claim. He ended up eventually going to the state legislature of the Commonwealth of Kentucky and asking for relief and a pension, which he got a small pension. We named Kenton County after him. He was buried in Ohio, at Urbana, Ohio, and I assure you that some night, yes it will, we'll get him back. Just be patient. And after all, we should, because they stole our rock. You remember that rock down there by Portsmouth they pulled out of the river and took over there? That's our rock. We almost went to war over that one. Number 4.
Mr. President, President Jefferson, sir, Give me a couple more Marines and I'll clean out that nest of Barbary pirates for you.
Yes, Mr. Jefferson, sir. Give me a couple more Marines and I'll clean out that nest of Barbary pirates for you. Who am I? My name is Presley O'Bannon. I was born in Virginia, but I spent the last 20 years of my life in Kentucky. I was in the state legislature in Kentucky. I am buried in Greenville, Kentucky. And why am I important? Because I was one of the first American Marines, and in the early days of the American Navy, we were sending our ships out all over the world, and specifically into the Mediterranean, where they were being attacked by the Barbary pirates, and our sailors were being imprisoned or killed or ransomed, whatever took place. O'Bannon went to President Thomas Jefferson and said, "I'll take care of this problem for you." Jefferson gave him 12 Marines. He recruited 200 natives who were friendly to the Americans. They made a 600 trek across the desert to the stronghold of the Barbary pirates, Dern, which was located on the shores of Tripoli. Hence the line in the Marine Corps hymn, "From the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli." You can thank Presley O'Bannon for that one, folks. Number 5.
If that Crawford lady dies, we are going to hang the doctor right here in his own front yard.
That's right. If that Crawford lady dies, we're going to hang the doctor right here in his own front yard. Who am I?
Oh, the guy from Danville, the doctor.
Ephraim McDowell.
Dow, yeah.
And the lady was Jane Crawford. Her name was Jane Crawford. She lived 60 miles from Danville, south of Danville. And she had a medical problem. She didn't know what it was. She thought she was going to have twins. That wasn't the problem, as it turned out. She corresponded with Ephraim McDowell, the foremost physician of America in the West at this particular time. The year was 1805. And McDowell said, "You better come to Danville. You've got a big problem." She and 2 others, in the dead of winter, arrived in Danville, Kentucky on the 25th of December. The word had gotten out. The doctor's going to cut into the Crawford lady. In those days, doctors didn't cut into bodies because you let out the good humors. You know, the barber pole, the barber surgeon, the red and white, and all of that. That's where that comes from. A posse formed and out in the yard, and they threw a rope up over the tree. And they said, "If the doctor kills the Crawford lady, we're going to hang him right in the front yard." Now, you talk about medical incentive. That's medical incentive. He was going to perform the first internal operation, an ovarian cancer. It was actually a tumor. She had a 22.5-pound tumor. 22.5-pound tumor, and he was going to remove it. They also had no anesthetic. So she lay on the table, hands held down by 2 assistants, and recited songs throughout the entire process. He removed the 22.5-pound, the first operation of its kind in the world, and she got up, sewed her up. A week later, she got on her horse, went back home, lived many, many years thereafter.
What year was that?
1805. The winter
Now,
of
something like that happened to John Adams' daughter, too. She
Yeah.
had something very similar.
Exactly. In Danville, they have the Ephraim McDowell Hospital, and I went to a little school down there, and my son was born in the Ephraim McDowell Hospital. 1806. 5 and 6. She went home in 1806. Number 6.
Grandpa, you say each of those notches in that long rifle of yours is for a redcoat you shot at the Battle of New Orleans.
Yes, it is, my young man. Each of those notches in my rifle is for a redcoat I shot at the Battle of New Orleans. I'm from Greenville, Kentucky. My name is Ephraim Brank. Ephraim Brank. And this involved something known as the War of 1812. And as all of us recall, it's the war that we had our ups and downs in, but we eventually said we won it. I guess we won it. We got the best of it. The war was ended thanks to the activities of another Kentuckian by the name of Henry Clay. And they signed a treaty in 1812 at a place called Ghent. We have Ghent, Kentucky, here named after that. And the war was over, but we did not have Walter Cronkite to tell us, you see. So they were going to fight a battle in January at New Orleans, known as the Battle of New Orleans. And the American forces would be led by Andrew Jackson, the future president of the United States, muchly supported by the long riflemen from Kentucky, the so-called Hunters of Kentucky. And later there was a very famous song, the Hunters of Kentucky. They'll save your ladies, they're great shots, and so on. And what basically happened, this is one of the most misunderstood battles of all times. This was the battle that determined once and for all that the British claims to the Mississippi River Valley and that all those areas beyond that would be abandoned here in North America. And it was fought in New Orleans, commanded by Jackson, with the help of Lafitte the pirate, no less. And what they did was to put these big cotton bales up. And the Americans stood either on top or behind the cotton bales. The British were commanded by Lord Pakenham, General Pakenham, who was the brother-in-law of none other than the Iron Duke Lord Wellington. And these were the troops, you ready for this? These were the troops from the Battle of Waterloo. I'm not talking about the second team here. These were not JVs, folks. This was the first team. And they were about to engage a ragtag assembly of militiamen from America. The only problem was they wanted to fight this battle European style. And so they marched in perfect file with drums and bagpipes blaring, wearing red and white, which one marksman said was the color of a perfect target. And the Americans, who had long rifles, stood up on the cotton bales, while the British had brown Betsy's, which would shoot half the distance, and simply picked them off. And what made it even worse was the Americans didn't play fair. In those days, at one time during the American Revolution, a British marksman had a shot at George Washington, and he wouldn't take it because it was not cricket to shoot officers. Well, Ephraim Brink didn't know that rule, and he proceeded to pick off 21 British officers, including Lord Pakenham himself. And when it was all over with, there was only one British officer still standing. And he said, every time that guy stood up on that bale and shot, we knew we were dead. He never missed. He went back home to Greenville, and he's buried there right in the center of town in a private cemetery there in Greenville. Ephraim Brink, the hero of the Battle of New Orleans. Number 7.
Davy, old buddy, how many Mexicans did you say were out there?
Davy, old buddy, how many Mexicans did you say were out there? Who am I? Well, that's Davy Crockett he's talking to, but who am I?
Jim Bowie?
Jim Bowie, very good. Jim Bowie from Simpson County, Kentucky. The wildest animal in the West. Oh, he was always fighting. He sliced people up with his famous Bowie knife in all kinds of land speculation and all kinds of questionable activities. He had a whole lot of wives because his plan was to go into an area where somebody had a big land grant and to marry the daughter and then get control of the land. He had all kinds of spurious activities, including reselling slaves that supposedly ran away, that he had kidnapped, and so on. But he ended up in 1836 at no less than the Alamo, moving west always. And of course, the story is that he became quite sick. He was one of the officers at the Alamo, and he lay on his deathbed, and of course 9 million Mexicans came through the door, and he sliced most of them up, but they finally got him. He got killed at the Alamo. Jim Bowie. Legends. Some of that true. I don't know that he sliced up any Mexicans at the Alamo, but that's that. 8.
Mr. Fremont, sir, are you sure the Indians we're looking for are friendly?
Mr. Fremont, sir, are you sure those Indians we're looking for are friendly? Who am I? I'm the foremost scout of America in the 1850s. Christopher Kit Carson from Simpson County, Kentucky, who was with Fremont, who aspired to be president, and of course that's why Fremont was out there trying to. And Carson was involved in the war against the Mexicans out in California, became an international celebrity. Many of these small little books about Kit Carson and his adventures and so on. Christopher Kit Carson was from Simpson County, Kentucky, another Kentuckian, moving out west, doing the things Kentuckians do. And I don't know where he's buried, but we'll find out and dig him up. Number 9.
Captain Anderson, the rebels are preparing to fire upon us.
Captain Anderson, the rebels are preparing to fire upon us. Who am I? My name is Richard Anderson. I'm a Union officer at a place called Fort Sumter. On the opening moments, I'm the commander of the fort.
Sumter.
Sumter, yes, Fort Sumter. And of course, Mr. Beauregard and the boys over there playing contrary to people's beliefs. They were not playing Dixie. They were playing the song of the South, which is the Bonnie Blue Flag. It was only after Jefferson Davis, another Kentucky we'll talk about, was inaugurated, and the band only knew one song, Dixie, that Dixie became, they played it numerous times during the inauguration. Then they thought that was the song of the South. Incidentally, it was written by a Northerner. But anyway, from Ohio. That's another story. But Richard Anderson was the commander, and what basically happened at that fort was they lobbed some shells in, and nobody was killed. It was not, no one was killed. The fort surrendered. Anderson and his boys were paroled. He was sent to Louisville, where he was from Louisville, Kentucky, and he spent the war as kind of a provost there in Louisville, Kentucky. He didn't take up arms, as he had promised there. Richard, so in the opening moments of the American Civil War, there stood a Kentuckian defending the Union. Number 10.
I don't want to be president. I want to command the army.
I don't want to be president. I want to command the army. Who am I? Washington. We're talking about Kentuckians. I don't want to hear those other guys. Grant's from Ohio. My name's Jefferson Davis.
Oh.
Jefferson Davis. As in the West Point graduate Jefferson Davis. As in the Secretary of War under Franklin Pierce, Jefferson Davis. As in the commander of the Mississippi Rifles in the Mexican War. As in being the son-in-law of Zachary Taylor. Yeah, that Jefferson Davis. As in the hero of Buena Vista, that Jefferson Davis. A military figure of great prominence who was born in Fairview, Kentucky, who later moved to Mississippi, and who, at the opening of the Civil War, was the foremost senator from the South in the American Senate, who made numerous speeches against the war, saying this will tear our nation asunder. But when the moment came, he had to make the final speech. He made a final speech in the Senate, and even the radical Republicans cried. It was that emotional, that dramatic. He wanted to command the army. Others wanted him to be the president of the Confederacy, which he was. The president of the Confederate States of America was a Kentuckian. He is much maligned later by the song "Hang Jeff Davis to a Sour Apple Tree." He was caught supposedly dressed as a woman at Millvale, Georgia, fleeing away. He later retired and wrote his history. But he was a tremendous military commander in his own right, which is quite interesting. Number 11.
I would certainly like to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky.
I'd certainly like to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky. Abraham Lincoln from LaRue County, Kentucky. I know those people from Illinois think he's an Illinoisan. That annoys me, but that's another story. Abraham Lincoln, born in Kentucky. And as we well know, his family moved west, first to Indiana, where they had a small cabin along Pigeon Creek there in southern Indiana. Then he moved to Illinois. He became, of course, the first Republican president of the United States. We all know the Lincoln story, but probably what you don't know is he maintained very, very close ties to his friends in Kentucky, particularly families in Lexington and Louisville. And of course, he married a Lexingtonian, a member of the gentry of Lexington, Mary Todd. And folks, the Todds didn't much care for Lincoln. He was a rough, backward lawyer, and they were Lexington gentry. And if you don't know what Lexington gentry is, you haven't been to Lexington, folks. You don't get into that group. I mean, that's the group, you know. And so Lincoln had a tough time with the family. In fact, two of Mary Todd's relatives fought. I think both of them were killed fighting for the South. Lincoln once said, "I have a lot of trouble with my in-laws. I really have a lot of trouble with my in-laws." He said, "You know the Todds? The Todds use 2 D's to spell their name, and God Almighty only uses 1. 12.
I just shot that blankety blank blank rebel horse thief.
I just shot that blankety blank blank rebel horse thief. Who am I? Who's the rebel horse thief? The horse Jim Ravage. His name's John Hunt Morgan. Morgan of Morgan's Raiders from Lexington, Kentucky, who led the destruction against the railroads and several raids. Eventually, you know, he crossed over into Indiana and into Ohio, was captured and sent to a prison in Ohio, and then mysteriously escaped and worked his way back south. We now know that the Bruce family were one of the families from northern Kentucky that helped arrange that escape and helped shepherd him on through Kentucky to and ultimately Tennessee. The problem with John Hunt Morgan was he didn't obey orders. He didn't pay attention to orders. And the South didn't know what to do with him. So they made him a brigadier general and sent him down to eastern Tennessee, thinking that couldn't get much trouble there. Well, they got in trouble because the Yankees were after him. He and his raiders and many others had been stealing horses everywhere. They were horse thieves. There were 1 million horses killed during the Civil War. 1 million horses died during the Civil War, and many of the great thoroughbred farms were raided. There's all kinds of stories of them disguising their stallions and doing things to avoid losing their stock. That's really the key to why the Kentucky Derby was begun, because Lexington tended to at least lean toward the South in their breeding, where Louisville, of course, then the Derby was founded as a rival to the old Lexington track there. But John Hunt Morgan ended up in Greenville, Tennessee, a Yankee sergeant. The story goes, a Yankee sergeant trapped him in a burning building, saw him on the ground, put his pistol to his head, and shot him in the head and declared, "I just shot that blank, blank, blank rebel horse thief." That's not what happened, folks. What actually happened was the Yankees came to the town, surrounded the town. Morgan decided he better get out of there. He put on civilian clothing and was sneaking out, and a private sentry, a Union sentry, saw him sneaking out and said, "Halt," and he didn't halt, and he put a bullet right through his head. That's what actually happened, but the other story is much better. Okay. Not that historians would lie. 13.
Now look here, Sheriff. Her brother said it'd be all right.
Now look here, Sheriff. Her brother said it would be all right. Who am I? I live in Richmond, Kentucky. My name is Marcellus Clay. Marcellus Clay. And who am I? Cassius Marcellus Clay. Cassius Marcellus Clay. I started out having inherited slaves from my father. I went to Boston and heard William Lloyd Garrison speak, decided slavery was bad. I came back to Lexington, Kentucky, and started publishing a newspaper down there against slavery, one of the first in the South. My own son led a raid on the office to burn my office. I heard about it, fled to Cincinnati, Ohio, briefly. I was originally a Whig. Everybody asks what my politics are. I'm a Whig. I'm a Henry Clay Whig. I believe in such silly things as balancing the budget, building roads and bridges, and cleaning up our rivers, and buying American goods. All stupid ideas, I realize. But Henry Clay Whig. And that's what Cassius Marcellus Clay was originally. And Clay ran for president in the 40s and lost. But then along came another Kentuckian by the name of Abraham Lincoln. And Cassius Clay jumped on the bandwagon for Lincoln and was one of his foremost spokesmen. This guy's an enigma if there ever was one. He helped get Lincoln elected, although not in Kentucky. Lincoln hardly got any votes at all in Kentucky. Hardly any. And he didn't carry the second time when he ran in Kentucky. He didn't carry Kentucky. But Clay was in the inner circle. The only problem was, what do you do with this guy? He won't shut up. And so when Lincoln got elected, he figured out what to do. Now, he didn't make him Secretary of State. That would have been too dangerous. But what he did instead was to make him ambassador to Russia. Get him out of there. And Clay took his wife with him to Russia, but she didn't like him. She didn't like Russia at all. And so he came back home, and he was sent back to Russia, and she stayed there. That turned out to be a strategic error, because Mr. Clay took up with every ballerina in sight, including having a son by one of them, whom he later adopted. He was called back to Kentucky right before the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation and asked by Lincoln to sound the Kentuckians about the emancipation. And you'll notice that the Emancipation says the slaves are free in the states that have seceded. Kentucky had not seceded officially, although 61 counties did have a Confederate convention and a governor. And so we fought this in the courts for years and years afterwards, trying to get our property rights, because these were Englishmen want to get their money, you see. That's what Englishmen do. They sell things, they make money, as we well know. And so Clay came back, and then after the war became a staunch defender of Southerners and their rights, which was really strange. But he ended up in Richmond, Kentucky, in his ancestral home. And by this time he was in his 80s, and he'd been married to that same lady for many, many years. And he hired this tenant farmer. And this tenant farmer had a very nice-looking sister. And so Clay divorced his wife and decided he's going to marry this 15-year-old girl. Well, the word got out that old man Clay was going to marry a 15-year-old, and the sheriff and the posse arrived. But Mr. Clay was waiting for him. He had an old single-bore cannon that he loaded up with nails and barbed wire and anything else he could get, and he blasted it a few times at the posse, and the sheriff allowed as hell that would be perfectly fine if he married that 15-year-old. Cassius Clay.
At what point during his career did he release all his slaves?
Very early on, that was probably in the late 50s. Yeah. He had gone to Boston and heard Garrison and got involved in all this. Of course, ties in with Harriet Beecher Stowe and all of that was going on at this time. 14.
Robert? Yes, sir, Elder. When do you think Frank and Jesse will be back from the bank?
Robert? Yes, sir, Elder.
Jesse James.
The James family. Now, what's that have to do with Kentucky? Well, Robert and Zerelda James, the parents of Frank and Jesse James, lived in Georgetown, Kentucky, Scott County. And Robert was a school teacher and a minister, part-time minister, and Zerelda was a teacher as well. And some say, actually, that Frank was born in Kentucky. The records are really unclear. But we all know, of course, they moved to Missouri. We know that. And they had relatives here in Kentucky. There were raids in Kentucky by the Quantrells, who were relatives of the Jameses. And, of course, to keep tradition, not too long ago, though we didn't bring him back, we dug up Jesse James to see if it really was Jesse James. And lo and behold, the guy that got shot by that dirty little coward, Mr. Howard, who shot Mr. Howard and laid poor Jesse in his grave. We love ballads here in Kentucky. They tell stories. Was, in fact, Jesse James in the grave. Okay? Robert, incidentally, the father, moved to Missouri, but Frank ended up in Chicago as a banker. That's appropriate. 15.
First you find them, then you hang them.
Yeah, first you find them, then you hang them. Who am I? I'm the law west of the Pecos, folks. Judge Roy Bean from Mason County, Kentucky. Yes. And I moved west with the railroad. I was actually a saloon keeper. And everywhere the railroad set up stock, I was there selling whiskey. And I kept moving and moving until I moved about as far as I could move. And ended up in this unnamed town. And along came a United States Marshal. And he said, somebody in this town is going to have to be the law. And Judge, he wasn't judge at the time, but Royce stuck his hand up and he said, oh, I'm the most prominent man in town, so I'll be the judge. I'll be the judge. So he got himself one book, the Texas Statutes of 1880 something or another. He only had one law book. And all his law was dispensed from that book. He also proceeded to name the town Langtree after a famous actress who he had never met. He worshipped from afar, Langtree, Texas. And he got the reputation of being the hanging judge. The truth of the matter is he only hung one guy. He usually fined them, got the money from them, and then said, now boys, I'm going to let this guy go, but he's going to buy drinks at my tavern for everybody. Judge Roy Bean. West of the Pecos, the law. 16.
I'm the man that made aces and eights a dead man's hand.
I'm the man that made aces and eight a dead man's hand. Who am I? Yeah, that's who got shot. Who shot Wild Bill Hickok? This is probably an alias name. His name supposedly was Jack McCall. He was an orphan from Louisville, Kentucky, who changed his name several times, but ended up in Deadwood one time, wandered into a bar, they were playing cards. He got drunk and said, can I play cards with you boys? He got into the game, lost all his money. Wild Bill Hickok said, here son, here's $1, get yourself something to eat. Supposedly that was an insult that triggered this. Probably the truth of the matter is he wanted to shoot somebody famous. Hickok had always sworn that he would never sit with his back to the door. But for some reason, the next day, the only seat available was to the door. He sat down in the seat. McCall came in, walked over, put a pistol to the back of his head, and shot him. Hickok's hands fell to the floor. It was aces and eights, the dead man's hand. McCall bolted from the tavern, ran across the boards there, fell into the water trough, got out of the water trough, tried to steal a horse, and the saddle came off, ran down to the local entertainment area, and they found him. They brought him in and charged him with murder. They had a minors' court, and they said, "Are you guilty or not guilty?" He said, "I'm not guilty." They said, "Why aren't you guilty?" "Because I was avenging the death of my brother. Hickok shot my brother in cold blood back in Abilene." They were minors. Said, "Okay, no problem. You're free." He went all over the West Territory boasting, "I am the man that shot Wild Bill Hickok." He made a big mistake. He got up into the Dakotas, which was federal territory, and a U.S. Marshal arrested him. They retried him, found him guilty, took him out and hung him. A few years back, you ready for this? They dug him up. They were moving the graveyard. They opened up the coffin, and there he was still with the rope around. Jack McCall from Louisville, Kentucky. 17.
There is no man on earth who can take this medal away from me.
There's no man on earth who can take this medal away from me. Who am I? My name is Dr. Mary Walker. During the Civil War, I was a Union nurse, but I later got a medical doctor's degree. And I nursed Union soldiers, not Confederate, Union soldiers in Louisville, Kentucky. Wounded, Paul talked about that today. During the Civil War, they gave out medals of honors like you give out Kentucky colonelships, you know. They gave out way too many. They give them to whole units for capturing a flag or whatever. And as time went by, a president by the name of Cleveland decided, hey, they've cheapened this medal. We need to review all these medals and revoke the ones that aren't right. Well, Mary Walker had gotten a medal for nursing Union soldiers. She's the only female that had gotten it. They revoked her medal. She said, "Oh, no. No, you're not taking this medal away from me. No way." They said, "Oh, you got to give it back." Nope, 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 nope. So she said, "If you only have men that have medals, all right." So she started dressing as a man. She wore a stovepipe hat, wore a long frock, put on false whiskers, smoked cigars. That didn't work. So she started picketing the White House. And it was a media circus. All kinds of cartoons, all kinds of disparaging things about the president. Finally he said, "Get her out of here, get her out of here, let her keep her medal." That's fine, and she still to this day, I believe, is the only female that got the Medal of Honor. Mary Walker from Louisville, Kentucky. Number 18.
Mrs. Nation, please be careful where you are swinging that hatchet.
Yes, Mrs. Nation, please be careful where you're swinging that hatchet. And that, of course, is
Carrie Nation.
Carrie Nation from Garrett County, Kentucky. Carrie Nation from Garrett County, Kentucky. She married. Her husband was a drunk. He beat her. She divorced. She remarried. Her second husband was a drunk. He beat her. She divorced. She married again. Her third husband was a drunk. She didn't wait around to get beaten by him. She simply went out west to Kansas, and because that evil liquor had destroyed her life, got herself a little hatchet, as you well know, and went to work on the barman, and became the symbol of the temperance movement in the late 19th century. Carrie Nation, the crusading, hatchet-wielding Kentuckian who led the temperance movement. 19.
I'm from Kentucky. Americans don't dip their flag to foreign rulers, and this is particularly so if that ruler just happens to be the King of England.
I'm from Kentucky, and Americans do not dip their flag to foreign rulers, and that is particularly true if that ruler happens to be the King of England. And who am I? My name is John Wesley Rose. John Wesley Rose. And I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, even though some records say he's from California. He actually was born in Louisville, Kentucky. He did move to California later. He actually was an attorney in California. But at this particular time, he was a great athlete at the University of Michigan. And he was the greatest track and field star of the early 1900s. He had won several medals at the Olympics, and when they held the Olympics at the turn of the century in London, England, he was designated to carry the American flag in the parade. He also happened to be, you ready for this, Irish.
Oh.
And he and his colleagues, many Irishmen on that team, said, hey, we got an idea. And so every nation filed past the King of England, dipped their flag in reverence, and when Wesley Rhodes went by, he kept the flag high. And it was a sensation, and that's what he said. Americans do not dip their flags to foreign rulers. And to this day, the American delegation does not dip its flag at the Olympics to foreign dignitaries. Thanks to Mr. Rhodes from Kentucky. 20.
Let's see how one of these 6 guns stacks up against one of those Tommy guns.
Yeah, let's see how one of these 6 guns stacks up against my Tommy gun. Who am I?
Oh, a Thompson.
That's right, John Talifero. I know